This is Rashawn Evans, and you're listening to the No Nonsense Podcast.
Welcome into No Nonsense, a Tennessee Titans podcast, your place to go for on-demand Titans coverage that is 100% free of the nonsense that we always see in sports talk these days. I'm Luke Worsham, joined by the other two hosts of No Nonsense, Matthias Wadner and Will Lomas. We have got an exciting show for you today as we continue our coverage of the 2021 NFL Draft. We are going to dive headfirst into the wide receivers today, arguably the Tennessee Titans' biggest need right now. We're going to talk about which options, specifically in the first 3 rounds or so, make the most sense from a scheme standpoint for the Titans. Where does the value line up? We're going to be answering those very important questions. We're also going to be talking about some very important other non-draft-related news surrounding the Titans. Mike Vrabel had a press conference on Monday. We're going to get into the 2 things that he said in that weren't boring, because there was not much that he said that wasn't boring, but there were a couple of things. We're also going to talk about former Titans defensive coordinator Jim Schwartz reportedly rejoining the team in a mystery role. We'll get into all of that in today's episode. Let's start there, guys. Jim Schwartz, former Titans defensive coordinator for many years, is reportedly back, but we don't know what exactly he's going to be doing. It was initially reported by Brent Doherty of 1045 The Zone that he would be taking a senior advisory role of some kind. Now we have Paul Kuharsky coming out and saying it's going to be more of a consultant basis. He may come in 3 or 4 days a week. We really don't know what his role is. What do we think about this? Because Vrabel in his press conference sort of, to no fanfare, really made the comment, well, we're not done necessarily building the staff. There's still additions we could make. This is probably what he was getting at when he said that. What do we think about this hire?
I'm not as excited or ecstatic about it as I think a lot of Titans fans are. I think a lot of them probably think that our defensive issues are just solved with this. I don't. I'm still very concerned. I don't feel all that great about the direction of the defense. I do think this will help a little bit because I think it takes off some of the pressure off Shane Bowen. And I think it gives him another voice, in his head or someone behind his shoulder to kind of help guide him as he becomes the quote unquote defensive coordinator. And I mean, it's always a good thing to have smart defensive or offensive minds on your coaching staff. I do think Schwartz is that, although his defenses haven't been as prolific over the past couple of seasons as they were back in the day when he was, let's say, the Titans defensive coordinator or the head coach of the Lions. I still think he can offer a helping hand on the defensive side of the ball. So I'm glad they did something, because if they would have just gone blind with Shane Bowen for the second year in a row, I think things would have gone pretty bad. And I still think they can, but I think this is a step in the right direction in terms of trying to help fix the defense.
Yeah, I guess the good news here is it can't be a bad move. Like, it's not going to be one of those too many cooks in the kitchen kind of things, because there's only 2 or 3 people who have any idea what they're talking about in that whole building on the defensive staff. And I don't mean that necessarily as a dig, just as, like, we know that Shane Bowen doesn't know what he's doing. That's kind of what this whole offseason has been about, is making the defense foolproof so he can run it. And then you've got direct oversight from Vrabel, who only has 1 year of a defensive coordinator himself. So really the only person with experience in that building is Haslett. I mean, if I think he's still there. I'm not 100% sure. But having Jim Schwartz there, who's been a defensive coordinator and who's been an above average defensive coordinator to a good defensive coordinator for most of his career, it can only be a good thing. And even when his defenses as a whole weren't great, they were at least good at getting to the quarterback and causing problems for young quarterbacks and stuff like that, which are all things that the Titans need to be able to do this year and beyond with Trevor Lawrence, with whoever's going to replace Deshaun Watson, for whatever reason in Houston. I don't know. Like, I don't want to get too excited about this because he's not the defensive coordinator and we don't know how much input he's going to have. But then again, it really can't be a bad move. Like, at the very least, you're getting somebody with experience and knowledge and somebody who has not been the worst person as a position coach or as a defensive coordinator, which is what we've seen from most of the staff that Vrabel's assembled on that side of the ball.
I very much agree with the assessment that this can't be a bad thing. I think, if you go back and listen to when we did the Titan-sized podcast, probably, I want to say 3 years ago, whenever Malarkey got fired, we talked about, go get the big offensive mind and then go get Jim Schwartz as your defensive coordinator. Like, y'all remember that? We were like all three on board. And I think based on that, I think the three of us have a lot of respect for Jim Schwartz and what he does and his philosophy toward calling a defense. I will say this, though. I think that anyone who – and I haven't really seen anyone doing this, but I feel like it's going to come, whether from the Titans or from fans or from fanboys in the media, spinning this as like, well, now it's okay that they have Shane Bowen because good old Jim Schwartz is going to be in there too. No, they still hired Shane Bowen to run the defense. This does not make that go away. I'll use the analogy. I put this on my Twitter that I thought of earlier. It's like, I start a radio station and I hire to host the main show, our flagship show, someone who does not speak English. But then, like, as the technical producer who's running the boards, I hire some great radio broadcaster like I don't know, like Joe Buck, just to think of the first broadcaster that came to mind. I hire Joe Buck to run the boards, and I start advertising, hey, guys, new radio station, and we've got Joe Buck on the team. But you're never going to hear Joe Buck, and what you are going to hear is some dude that you're not going to be able to understand because he doesn't speak English. Like, me having Joe Buck running the boards does not nullify the fact that the guy on the microphone does not speak English. Jim Schwartz popping in every few days does not nullify the fact that this is still going to be a Mike Vrabel, Shane Bowen defense.
Yeah, you're probably right. And I'm interested to see what exactly his role will be, whether he's going to be kind of hands-on on the field or whether he's just going to be, one of those like quote-unquote consultants that's just in the booth. And I don't know what they really do. I never know what those people do. So we'll see. But like we've all said, it can't be bad. It can't be bad. And considering how awful the defense was last year, it's not a subtraction in any capacity. And I wish they would have just made him the defensive coordinator, to be honest, but they can't because they had already named Shane Bowen. But I just think this means that this is probably, unless the defense is outstanding, Shane Bowen's probably gone after this year, or at least gets demoted again. I still don't know what his role is. Vrabel doesn't know what his role is. We're going to talk about that in a little bit, but I don't know. I wish they would give these guys clear, defined roles so that we actually know what they're going to do. But I mean, we'll see. I do think it's a good move, and I'm glad Schwartz is back in Tennessee because even though he rubbed some people the wrong way in Detroit, I can't remember who he fought with. I think it might have been Jim Harbaugh. Well, everyone fights with Jim Harbaugh, so it doesn't really matter.
That's
but he really does bring a lot of energy, and he's a guy who just doesn't take any crap. And I think for for this defense, that's kind of what they need because they've been a little coddled in the past, and I think it's a good change of direction for them.
I'll say this: if we're going to see the classic Jim Schwartz wide 9, you're not going to see Harold Landry dropping into cover 2 anymore. I'll tell you that.
Yeah, and that's kind of the whole thing is the styles of defense that Shane Bowen ran last year and that Schwartz runs historically, they're drastically different. You're not going to see 3 defensive linemen, 1 edge, like all kind of bunched up tight. I mean, you're going to see guys spread out, and it's going to be very clear, pin your ears back, nothing's getting outside of me. They have very defined and not easy, but the roles are set up for your edges to win and your edges to get a lot of pressure and pressure quickly at the hindrance of your run defense, which is fine because this is the NFL and it's not 1985. Like, you need to have a good pass rush, and it's okay to be unsound in your run defense if you're going to be above average or good or great in your pass defense. So it'll be clear pretty quickly. And it'll boost the stats of, Bud Dupree and Harold Landry, obviously. Then you'll get increased performances from Jeffrey Simmons because, Schwartz is the guy who kind of cultivated Albert Haynesworth and Fletcher Cox, and Ndamukong Suh. If nothing else, he's made even though he's traditionally a linebackers coach by trade, as a defensive coordinator, he's always found and developed and managed really good defensive tackles. So, if all he does is make the front four 50% better, then it'll be a drastic difference because that's where the most of the talent is on the defensive roster right now. So, again, don't get your hopes up. Like Luke said, this is not a fix. This is still an issue, but instead of just sitting there with a broken arm, at least they've tried to put a Band-Aid over it. They've tried something to fix it. And, whether they actually go through with it or, how much power they give him is yet to be seen. But even if it's a foot in the door now, and maybe next year he gets named defensive coordinator and they fire Shane Bowen because they realize he can't do it, then, that's great. But it has to start with this.
Let's talk a little bit about what Vrabel had to say generally in that press conference on Tuesday, because as I sort of joked at the beginning, it wasn't a lot, which is typical of Vrabel. He likes to say a lot of words without really saying anything. There were a couple of things that jumped out, though. One of them being the comment of, well, we're not necessarily done with the staff. Clearly they weren't with this Jim Schwartz move. Also with that, you had the comment that I know Will thinks is just patently false, where Vrabel said they interviewed or spoke to at least quite a few people when they were looking to hire a defensive coordinator. And I have more thoughts on that in the context of what he had to say about Shane Bowen. But do we think, just for now, that was true? We know they hired or they interviewed the Steelers guy. I can't remember what his name is. They're like DB coach or something.
Terrell Austin.
Yeah, that's it. What do we think about this?
Maybe it's true. I don't know. We only got that one report from that Terrell Austin had been interviewed. And we also, it wasn't for the defensive coordinator spot. It was for the offensive coordinator spot, the Clemson guy. They had interviewed him, I think, or they reached out to him or something. I think those were the only 2 rumors that had come out. So I don't know what exactly they actually did in terms of searching for potential outside candidates for the defensive coordinator position. I don't buy anything that Vrabel is selling, ever. Like, his press conferences have been so frustrating and so annoying. I've told you guys several times you're just wasting your time listening to them, but I know you have to do it for your jobs, and I guess I should too, to talk about it in this podcast. But it is just so It really wears on you, some of the things he says, and I just have a hard time actually believing what he's telling me.
I mean, one of the benefits, of the coronavirus and all of this that it's caused is I cannot tell you how many Vrabel press conferences I was quote unquote in this past season where I would just turn down the volume and like make a sandwich, because it's just a whole lot of nothing. But
well, I mean, you'd get answers easier from a sandwich. Like
I'll say I don't think he'd have any reason to lie. I think he did probably. If he says he interviewed quite a few people, then he interviewed quite a few people.
I mean, I guess, like, what does interview mean? Does interview mean we called and reached out and asked if there'd be interest and, that we did something over the phone?
Probably.
Or, I mean, because that's not an interview. That's just, I mean, that's just not, that shouldn't be qualified as that. I mean, they did the bare minimum to meet the Rooney Rule, and then they hired the guys they wanted to hire. Like, obviously, he's not going to come out and say it because then it puts the team at risk for, I mean, I don't know if they'd get dock draft picks or what that whole thing constitutes, like what the punishment for that is. But you have to satisfy the Rooney Rule, and they very clearly didn't, have anybody else in mind for the job. They were just trying to wait as long as they possibly could to make the hires, and then they hired both of them at the same time, I believe, and they did it on a Friday, the Friday before the Senior Bowl, when John Robinson was out of town, and when Vrabel knew he wouldn't be asked to speak in front of people for months. Like, it was a bad job. Like, it was. They knew what they did.
They knew exactly what they were doing. It's a good job on their part.
Yeah, so it's like there is a reason to lie, and that's to get to this perfect time where they could hide from everybody for months, and hopefully people would die down from the outrage of them rehiring the worst defensive coordinator in the league last year. So, I mean, he doesn't have a reason to lie in saying, we interviewed several guys, but also there's no definition of several. Like, when he says several, he could mean I talked to our defensive line coach.
He said quite a few.
And I talked. Yeah, I mean, again, that's an ethereal number. Like, if I have quite a few concussions, 3 is quite a few concussions. If I win the lottery quite a few times, 3 is a lot of times to win the lottery. Like, there are all these, speculative, like, he'll never say a name, like, probably because we already know the only names that they actually interviewed. But, and he could also assume that, he was trying to quote unquote interview Dean Pease. So it's all these different things where you shouldn't give him any more credit than he deserves based off what we know. If they were close with anybody, Rappaport or Schefter would have leaked it out, and they would have said, they talked to this guy and it was close, because they'd be trying to do a favor for that assistant coach, hoping that they get a favor done for them when that assistant coach gets hired to be a head coach. So based off all the information we have, it's given Vrabel way too much credit to assume he did anything other than the bare minimum to get Shane Bowen through.
I want to talk about what Vrabel said about Shane Bowen, because he was asked if any roles will change on the coaching staff, or I think the question might have been, it was a general question. Now that I'm thinking about it, it was a general question about Todd Downing and Shane Bowen, and the answer was, he just started listing people. He said Shane will be the defensive coordinator, Todd will be the offensive coordinator, Craig Ackerman will be the special teams coordinator. He'll be assisted on special teams by Matt Edwards. We hired a few guys on offense and moved Ryan Crow to the outside linebackers coach. Very just illuminating answer there. And then he was asked, will anything about Shane Bowen's role change? Shane will be the defensive coordinator and Todd will be the offensive coordinator. Craig will coordinate the special teams this year. I don't know if you know what coordinators' jobs are to coordinate the coaching staff. And then I believe Joe Rexrode followed up and asked again about Bowen. Shane is the defensive coordinator. I'm not sure what we're looking for here, he said. But Shane is the defensive coordinator. Jim Haslett is the inside linebackers coach. Anthony Midget coaches the cornerbacks. That's our coaching staff. And then Joe Rexrode pushed him again. And he said, will anything change about Shane Bowen's role? And he said, hopefully he'll help us win more football games. And then, this is what got me, because this is obviously just terrible. It's a little more funny in my voice, I would hope, than it is in Vrabel's, like, droney, sedated press conference voice. But he was asked, basically, so all of those answers were to questions along the lines of what is his role, what are his responsibilities, is there anything new? Then finally he got asked what I was going to ask if it hadn't gotten asked when my turn came up, which is, why make this hire? Why is Shane Bowen the best defensive coordinator for the Titans? I'm very confident and excited about our staff, about the things we're going to do, about a lot of the things that we did. I make decisions that I think are going to help the football team. That's where we're at with this staff. There may be some more additions to our staff, but it's pretty much in place, and I'm excited about it. I recognize that this is a press conference, and this is not the place for bare honesty. But good night. You are tossed a softball. Why was Shane Bowen the choice for defensive coordinator? You don't even have to hype him up, because I know Vrabel doesn't like doing that. Just explain to us, here's what I thought the answer could have been to that question. I know I've been rambling for a minute, but let me finish this thought. The answer to that question could have very easily been, look, we know the results on the field weren't always great on defense last year, and we have a lot of improving to do. I already mentioned that we need to improve the pass rush, and we look forward to Bud and Danico Autry helping us do that. But the things that I saw from Shane Bowen inside the building that no one else gets to see gives me confidence that he's going to do a good job this year and that we're all going to be able to improve. Would that not have been a fine answer to that question? You didn't hype the guy up. You didn't start talking about how he's the greatest coach and how he's just some sort of defensive prodigy. But you also didn't just, given the chance to explain your decision, say nothing. So all of this and those quotes I read and that point I just made to say this. I think what Mike Vrabel was doing there is he didn't have anything to say about Shane Bowen. There was no explanation for why he was hired, because if there was, he would have given it. There wasn't anything he saw last year that made him think Shane Bowen was the right guy to keep around, outside from him bringing up later that Shane Bowen's loyal to Mike Vrabel. The reason Shane Bowen's still around is because Shane Bowen is a part of the boys' club. That's what I got from all of that.
You're not wrong. I mean, it's the same stuff we've kind of heard already. Like when he's pressed on Bowen, he doesn't respond. Like he does this thing where he shoves. I wrote a big long column about this as soon as they rehired him, where I think the headline of it was Mike Vrabel just showed us that he doesn't care about results and that winning and losing doesn't matter, because that's what this is. This is him hiring somebody who, even if you say you believe in somebody, if you believe in somebody to operate on you and you die, you shouldn't. I guess I should use a third person perspective. If you trust somebody to operate on somebody and they kill the patient, and then you don't still trust them to do it again, say, oh, you'll get them next time. It's like, no, they're 1 for 1 on killing patients. Don't give them another chance. At the very least, knock them back down and send them back to school, whatever. But this misplaced belief in, first of all, he's never produced anyone. He's constantly underperformed. His position groups are very rarely any better without him than they were with him. So it's got to be something where, they drink a beer late at night and he says, you know what? I think I've really learned a lot from you, Mike. You're like a father to me. And Mike's like, yeah, I'm great, huh? And then Shane Bowen just like, yeah, maybe one day I can be like you. And that's the only thing I can think in this dynamic, because No outside linebackers ever gotten better. We've talked plenty about how he made every single defensive player on the roster last year regress because he either A, didn't know how to communicate, or B, didn't know how to coach the players up to fit the system that he had put in. And everybody bent over backwards to make excuses for him about how they didn't have a training camp and how they didn't get preseason and all this until about week 12 when you just really can't make those excuses anymore. And he kept making the same mistakes over and over. And, by the end of the year, he had the worst third down defense in history. And I mean, there is no rational explanation on why you double down for a guy like that. Even like you said, Luke, if you're like, well, behind closed doors, he puts in a lot of work. The reason he didn't say that is because everybody would just say, where's the results? Like, can you show me any? Not only did he not improve the defense in any way, you can look at the defense in week 1 and look at them in week 17, and they're worse in week 17 than they are in week 1. And it's not because they lost several key starters or anything like that. That's not it. They just don't know what to do. They're out of place. They've potentially ruined Kevin Byard. I mean, I hope he gets back on track this year. But, I mean, I've watched the Titans game several times over and over and over, either looking at, the times they played the Colts for Danique Autry or the times they played the Steelers or, whatever, or just watching them play. And, I mean, it's just time and time again. He's, pulling up before he gets to the ball. I don't know if he was hurt. I don't know what the deal was. But that is not the Kevin Byard that we saw for every season before this. So, I mean, he's actively ruining the good players on this team, and he hasn't developed anyone. So there is no argument to be made for him. So Vrabel's just ducking his head for as long as he can. And then if it doesn't work this year, like we've talked about, at least one of those people has to go. Either Bowen has to go or Bowen and Vrabel. But they can't have another year like they did this year on defense after they've invested all this money in defense this offseason and expect to keep their jobs.
Imagine being so bad at your job that your boss or your colleague can't even lie about your qualities, what he thinks about you. Like it has to be that bad. And honestly, I'm starting to feel bad for Shane Bowen. Vrabel kind of even hung him out to dry, not only by not answering, his defined role, but also I think you said that they hope that they win more games this year with him as defensive coordinator.
They won 11 games last year.
Yeah, that pretty much signals that he thought that Shane Bowen did an awful job last year because they should have won more. So I don't know, man. Like, this is such a weird dynamic. It really doesn't have to be. Like you said, Luke, all Vrabel had to do was come out and say, look, he could have gone with full coach speak. He could have just said, I like what he brings to the table. I think he's a smart guy. Loyal worker, colleague. The players like him. I think he's going to do a good job.
Exactly.
That was it. But he couldn't even do that because, no, hold on.
Okay,
These
sorry.
players have been held hostage on social media to praise him, right? Or am I right?
Kevin Byard going on the Jim Wyatt article.
Brutal.
I like him. Did I say that right? He's like, fantastic.
I hate that. Like, it's like you can see him, like, even as a quote, you can see him reading off paper. He might have just said, insert a quote that you think I would say here and, why it did it or whatever. It's just bad. Like, it's so hard to watch because you see other guys, like, case in point, look at how the offensive players responded to Arthur Smith getting a head coaching job, and look at how many of them went out of their way to praise him, love him up on Twitter that, it was great. He's such a great coach. He deserves all this. Shane Bowen, who it's not like Shane Bowen came out of nowhere last year. Like, he's been on the staff. He's quote unquote paid his dues as a linebacker coach. And then he got promoted, and he officially got promoted this year, and nobody said a word about it. Not for an hour, not for like days. I think it was something like 4 days. And then Kevin Byard, maybe, and Malcolm Butler or somebody, who's now gone, tweeted up about how they like it. It was so embarrassing. Like, I don't know if that's the whole like draft day, nobody went to his party kind of thing. But if there was a moment where everybody needed to look and say, like, this is the evidence that he doesn't have any influence in the locker room and that they don't like him, that's the smoking gun. So, it's got to make the defensive players hate him. Like, they've got to hate that, like, they know they're not getting any help especially after having Dean Pease, although most of them don't have him anymore because most of these guys weren't there when Dean Pease was there. But after seeing what an actual defensive coordinator does in their day-to-day job, like, they've got to be so embarrassed that they have to go out there and basically make it all up on the fly, which is why it's good that they have Jim Schwartz coming in. And it's also, I would bet money that one of the reasons why Bud Dupree and Danico Autry were both signed is because they're older guys who've been in functioning defenses and they can basically coach their position groups on the field. Like, same thing with Janoris Jenkins. Like, it's very rare that you get older at several positions, and when you do, usually one of the things that are brought up over and over again is, they have leadership qualities, the good work ethic, all that kind of stuff in terms of being on top of being productive already. So I just guarantee that whether Mike Vrabel sees it for that or not, John Robinson brought these guys in because he's like, look, if we're going to survive this, y'all are going to have to coach this team because this dude can't even face the right way. Like, he can barely speak into a microphone and walk without falling over. So good luck.
It's very weird. I think we can all agree on that. The dynamic, it's just strange. Let's talk about another area of the Titans that isn't very good right now, the wide receivers. Because right now you've got A.J. Brown, who's awesome. You've got Josh Reynolds, who we don't really know. And we don't know what he's going to be able to bring the Titans is what I mean by that. And then it's a bunch of, like, practice squad level players. Then it's the Cameron Batsons. It's the Nick Westbrook-Akeens. It's not good. And I have a little piece coming out later this week about how I think the Titans need to take a receiver in either the first or second round of the draft and go get someone that's going to come in and help A.J. Brown and Tannehill, because they also lost, in addition to losing Corey Davis, their number 2 receiver, they also lost Jonnu Smith. So the Titans need some pass catchers, and it is time for us to talk about which ones in the draft at the wide receiver position make the most sense. We talked a little bit before we started recording. I kind of tend to like Terrace Marshall for them in the first round. He's a guy that can do everything. He averaged 15 yards per catch in college. He has experience playing both, extensive experience playing both in the slot and outside. And what did we talk about a week or so ago, guys, about how they need someone who's not just, a quote-unquote slot guy or a quote-unquote outside guy, because that way you can move around and you can put A.J. Brown in the slot, and if they have Marshall, they can mix and match the two. He ran a air quote, I'm doing the, like, winking meme. You can't see me. 4.3840. Let's add 4 to that. He ran 4.42 in the 40. To me, he's a very good, intriguing prospect. Does a lot of things really well. Whereas a lot of the guys that are probably in that end of first round into the second round territory, for me, have more question marks.
To me, pretty much all the receivers have question marks. Even Jalen Waddle, to me, has question marks. Would I take him at 22? Yes, but I'm not as sold as others are on him. I think only Chase and Devontae Smith, although I could make the case that Devontae Smith is just way too skinny and it's kind of a little concerning. But those guys aren't going to make it to 22 anyway, so we really don't have to worry about them. I do like Marshall. When I initially started watching him, I wasn't too big of a fan just because I thought he was very slow in terms of his route running, especially on, like, comebacks and in breaking routes. He's really not that type of guy. He's not an outstanding route runner. He's not very agile laterally, but I started watching him a little more and I like him, especially if the Titans want someone who just has great straight line speed, can get deep down the field and get there quickly and also make the catches. He's one of the best over the shoulder catches on deep throws like I've seen in quite a while, really, and it's impressive. He also uses his body well to shield defensive backs at the catch point. So I like him. I still have a couple of doubts in terms of his ceiling at the next level. I don't know if he can really be that wide receiver one, but when I see him exploding on some of these deep routes, he kind of has a little bit of DK Metcalf to his game. He's obviously not as big, and I don't think he's really as talented. But he's someone that if you take at 22, I would feel okay about it, and I think he meshes well in terms of being a complement to AJ Brown, and I think it will allow AJ Brown to do more damage in the intermediate area of the field, where Corey Davis did most of his damage last year. Brown could kind of take a lot of Corey Davis's production from there. And then Marshall could just kind of like supplement the deep routes that A.J. Brown was getting last year.
Yeah, we talked about this a little bit before the podcast, but the problem I have with just in general with drafting a receiver here, or I guess with falling in love with a receiver there, is there's just not a huge gap between the wide receiver 4 and the wide receiver 8. And there's also the fact that I think that this offense basically can manufacture a wide receiver 2 if they get anybody with talent. Having said that, Marshall makes a lot of sense. Like, you watch him and he's very much not a wide receiver 1, and he's never been that guy. And the one time he was asked to be that guy, he opted out in the middle of the season before the Alabama game because he didn't want to play Alabama and get shut down and hurt his draft stock, if we're being honest. So, he's not the competitor you want if you want a wide receiver 1. But if you've got somebody who's a dog and can take all the attention away from him, like A.J. Brown, then he can thrive against the second best corner or against a defense that has to play more zone because they're worried about A.J. Brown and Derrick Henry tearing them up. So I like him fine. I think he'd be a good fit. I think he has a lot of things that this offense could use, and he can win a lot of the same ways that Corey Davis won. He's not as physical as a blocker. He kind of gets ragdolled at times. But, if you're just looking at like a receiver who's got home run threat ability and all that, there's plenty to like about Marshall. I think he would be fine. But again, I just have a hard time falling in love with somebody there because I just think that you can probably get as much talent later as you can if you draft him there.
So one thing we talked about before the show was the idea of the Titans take a receiver in the first round, whether that's Marshall or anyone else, and then come back in like round 3 late and take Amari Rodgers, who profiles a lot like Adam Humphries. But the problem that I think the Titans are going to run into with that we realized as we were having that conversation is there's just so many other needs with those 4 top 100 picks that the Titans have. They could use an edge rusher. They could use an inside linebacker, a right tackle. They could use a cornerback. There's so many positions that need help that you almost wonder, wouldn't it just be best to get your guy, whether that's someone like Marshall in the first round or Elijah Moore in the second round, and have your guy that's going to be your number 2, and then you can let Reynolds be the number 3, and then just move on and add to other positions, and then maybe come back on day 3 and find yourself Tajay Sharp 2.0.
Yeah, I think this team still has too many holes for us to to use 2 picks within the top 100 on one specific position. I do think they need to add 2 receivers, whether it be 1 in the draft and 1 in free agency or 2 through the draft. But I would prefer that they do it with one of those top 100 picks and then they get someone, like you said, on day 3. I like Reynolds. I think he's a capable number 2, and I think he's a really good number 3. So I'd be okay if they wait on receiver in terms of picking another one after the top 100. But I do think they need to use one for either. Yeah, I don't know. It's weird. It's weird. It's a good draft class. in terms of receivers. I like a lot of the players, but I think a lot of them have some flaws, and I'm not totally sold on a lot of them. And I think a lot of them are just so different, and you could kind of pick and choose what exactly you want. So I don't know what John Robinson and Todd Downing and Vrabel, what they want out of a receiver that they draft. I would assume they would like to get someone who's explosive, but I mean, it might be that they just want to supplement Josh Reynolds, play him on the outside, and then just get a slot receiver in the draft. I don't know how I would feel about that, really. I mean, like a pure slot receiver. But yeah, I don't know. They just need to add. They have too many holes left, and they're not signing anyone in free agency, and it's making me a little antsy. And I mean, we'll see what they're gonna do, but yeah, I don't know. I think a receiver within the first 2 rounds is probably necessary, and I think they're gonna be able to get a decent one. I just don't know if the value is gonna be there, specifically at 22.
Yeah, and there's only 3 wide receivers that they're going to take in this draft anyway, maybe 4 if they bend their normal rules, the Matthias Wadner rule.
Explain the Matthias Wadner rule for us, Will.
I think I'm the expert on the Matthias Wadner rule here.
Matthias can explain it if he'd like.
Yeah,
I just think
Matthias. I think so. I've written about it, but Matthias obviously is the one who identified it. So
how long ago?
Yeah,
Matthias. Was this 2 years ago?
I believe so.
I think this was when they drafted not Corey Davis. I think it was the year after.
It was the AJ. It was
AJ Brown. Yeah. I'm trying to find my tweet that had them all. But essentially, it's just John Robinson has never drafted a receiver that hasn't gone to 2 1,000-yard seasons in his college career. But I feel like he's going to break the rule this year. I think
COVID season changes that, because you look at a lot of the top guys in this year's draft class, and you pull up their stats because production is so important, and you go, well, dang, 500 receiving yards. Oh, they only played 5 games.
Yeah, exactly. That's why I think he's probably going to break that rule. I don't know who qualifies in terms of having 2 1,000-yard receiving seasons. I think Devontae Smith. I mean, Jamar Chase doesn't even qualify, right? He only had the 1 year, and then he opted out. So it's weird. It's a weird year. I don't know. I do think he will not draft someone that hasn't been productive for more than a season. I don't think. Like, I think he would draft Jamar Chase at 22 just because, I mean, he almost had 2,000 yards in one season, and he's so talented. But I don't see – John Robinson is just not a guy that drafts players that weren't productive in college. He just doesn't do it.
Yeah. So I have it right here. I said, because I wrote it in an article, I said, for those unfamiliar, the Matthias Wadner rule is the rule that every receiver John Robinson spends a draft pick on must have 2 or more 1,000-yard seasons. Looking back from the 2014 to 2019 classes, there are only 39 players with 2+ 1,000-yard seasons. So just under 8 receivers per draft class. So Robinson has drafted 4 of those receivers: Corey Davis, AJ Brown, Tajay Sharp, and Taywan Taylor. And those are the only receivers he spent draft picks on. So roughly 10% of the players have that requirement John Robinson's drafted, and he's drafted nobody else. So that's a pretty hard thing.
That's a pretty big sample.
Yeah, it's a pretty hard thing to draft in any class because, like I said, there's only about 8 receivers in a class that fit that. And for John Robinson to hit every single one of his to hit that, it's not a coincidence. So it's something to note. So I did the math and I figured out who that was. And the 3 guys that fit that are Devonta Smith, Diami Brown from North Carolina, and DeMonte Coxey from Memphis. Those are the only 3 that have done that. I said, if you wanted to make it to where the rule changes into receivers with 2,000+ receiving yards over the last 2 years to adjust for this, shortened season, it only adds 1 different receiver, and that's Elijah Moore. So if they do bend the rule, really the only guy who still has that exceptional level of production is Elijah Moore. So I don't know that like I don't know that that's a rule, but I'm just saying if that is a rule and that is something that, or at least a very, very strong preference that Robinson has, then it's going to be one of those four guys or two of those four guys.
They make sense. Like I could see them drafting Elijah Moore or DeAndre Brown, honestly. Bateman didn't have Bateman only had the one, and then
Elijah Moore, but
I think they will too, right?
Like Taylor Lewan and AJ Brown have already tweeted about how much they like him. He ran like a 4.3 at his pro day. I think he came in at 5'10".
Who is this? Elijah Moore.
Elijah Moore, the Ole Miss
4.35 in the 40.
Yeah, 4.35. So like, let's say he runs a 4.39 or a 4.4, whatever. Like that's still plenty fast. Like he easily separates on film. He plays in the slot, but AJ Brown only played in the slot when he was at Ole Miss. Like there's so many similarities. They've liked each other. I think AJ Brown and Elijah Moore have been tweeting about each other for, years. Like they've talked and they have a relationship. If you're drafting in this class, and this is just my kind of soapbox that I've been on for Elijah Moore for the last little bit, but if you're looking at this class and you're thinking, okay, what's the overcorrection John Robinson could make? It's instead of trusting and taking a leap of faith on somebody who you don't really have any connection to, which was Isaiah Wilson, why not go for the player that you have somebody, arguably your second best player on offense, and A.J. Brown, and your young star who's vouching for him. They play the same position. They communicate constantly. They both apparently have great work ethics. They both produced consistently at the college level. Like Elijah Moore did it with two different quarterbacks and two different offensive systems. Like there's plenty of reasons to think that the overcorrection is to take the safe pick here in Elijah Moore to pair with A.J. Brown at also a position of need. And it also fits the SEC requirement that John Robinson loves because, like we've said before, his last 3 first-round picks have all been SEC players, and 5 of his last 6 picks that are either the first or second round have been SEC players. So he does kind of check all those boxes for if there's one player that they might overdraft at that position or that they might just think is a perfect fit, it would be Elijah Moore.
The only thing that you think he could be one of those receivers in the future that plays pretty much every down, like 80% of the snaps. I don't know if he can consistently win on the outside, but maybe that doesn't matter. I mean, if you're drafting him in the second round, I don't know if that really does matter, but I don't know. Within the Titan system, I just don't know if we'll use that.
I mean, it is important to I think, have this discussion. I think A.J. Brown's role and involvement will change a lot in 2021, regardless of what happens in the draft, in that whereas previously, as good as he was still always sort of a cog in the system. He was the leading receiver, and he was getting the majority of the targets, but a lot of targets were going to Davis, targets were going to Jonnu Smith. When Humphreys was healthy, the offense will now be funneled through 22 half of the time and 11 the other half of the time. Like the passing game is now funneled through A.J. Brown and that there's a difference there. And I think we see A.J. Brown's targets go up substantially in 2021. I think we see, as a result of that, his yardage and his catch total go up substantially this year. And so I don't know that you necessarily need Corey Davis 2.0, someone of that skill level, but you do need someone that is going to, make a DB not be able to just kind of stand there. And I think that's what you end up with Nick Westbrook-Akeen or Cam Batson.
Yeah. I mean, the more I think about it, the more I do like Moore. I just think he's a little too undersized, I guess, in order to take that potential next step and be a wide receiver one. But you're not really drafting him for that because he's probably not getting drafted in the first round. But, I mean, he's always open in the middle of the field. He has amazing hands. He catches pretty much everything, especially in traffic. And when he has the ball in his hands, he's really explosive. He could just break any tackle and pretty much break anything for a long gain. So I'd be cool with that in the second round, mid-second round.
Yeah, and the question is kind of like, okay, you don't even really have to use him as a boundary wide receiver, especially not in year one because you've got Reynolds. So you can line up A.J. Brown, Reynolds, and Elijah Moore and be fine if you want to run 3 wide receivers or whatever, especially since you're not committed to bringing out 52 tight ends to put on the field. Now, having said that, there's not a ton of routes that the Titans run where they just ask their receivers to one-on-one win with no deception. Like, they run so much play action that the routes are basically already run for, like, they're already almost open by default. It's just, what read they are, like, like the conversation that people have had about Corey Davis being in one of the most opportune situations in the NFL. Like, you don't have to have a physical freak opposite A.J. Brown, because how do you cover A.J. Brown and Elijah Moore if Elijah Moore is a good, deceptive run-after-catch wide receiver? Like, you run your play action, the cornerback one or the cornerback on that side and the safety are rolled over towards A.J. Brown. If they do that, then all you have to do is have a guy who can win one-on-one, and maybe he doesn't beat the guy one-on-one every time, but maybe he beats him 1 out of 3 times, and that's a 20-yard play. It's like that's plenty. Like, this is not going to be a team that passes, 35 times a game all of a sudden. Like, they're not going to increase their pass performance. And I also think that there's something to be said about the whole idea of, getting A.J. Brown more targets. It's a good thing, but you also have to have somebody who can bear the load. And to put up this kind of production like he's put up for the last 2 years, Moore's been able to hold up to being, in the SEC, dealing with that kind of coverage and playing week in and week out against the toughest guys. Like, it's not like he's a guy who's had to be protected. They use him on jet sweeps. They hand him the ball. They line him up in the backfield sometimes. So, I mean, he's plenty tough. It's just, can he win outside versus press? I don't know. But he did also run a pretty good 40. And if you're spending all your time making sure you're locking down Elijah Moore, then somebody else should be open or somebody else should make a play.
Well, on that point, I think it's also important to bring this up. If you think back to the Titans' playoff game against the Ravens this past year, A.J. Brown started off very hot, winning his matchup with Marlon Humphrey. And then once the Ravens started rolling more coverage over to A.J. Brown and doubling him and sort of did their best to take him out, Corey Davis banged up, the Titans were worthless offensively. And the reason they're worthless is because it was all up to that point Khalif Raymond and Nick Westbrook-Akeen and Cam Batson. You've got to find somebody who, like I said earlier, this offense is going to funnel through A.J. Brown, but you have to find somebody who, when the opponent just sells out to stop A.J. Brown, the offense doesn't just die. And Corey Davis was that for the Titans last year, of course, obviously. But Corey Davis was hurt in that game, and now Corey Davis is gone. So you don't necessarily need someone as good as Corey Davis, but you need someone who can have that same effect, at least. But along with that, I also wouldn't be opposed to finding, a legit number 2 or 1B in the first round.
Yeah, I was told that's what Jonnu Smith was, is that he was an unstoppable wild card that can never be tamed, and he's basically a wide receiver 1 inline blocking. So I don't know. Like, that, the thing is, like, the Ravens just kind of suffocated the Titans on offense, and even when they got in rhythm, there was that play where Batson just fell down, which was terrible, and turned into an interception.
No, that was
that
Khalif.
sucked.
It was Khalif.
Oh, Khalif Ram, they're both the same. Like, they're the same person. Like, I feel like they've parent trapped us and switched jerseys before the game, and nobody's noticed or cared. Like, I don't know. Like, you're not wrong. Like, but then again, you're also saying if somebody's equipped to take out A.J. Brown, already something that's incredibly difficult to do, and your wide receiver 2 gets hurt, and they figured out how to stop Derrick Henry. Like, if that happens, you've just got to hope you've got a defense that can make a play or something. Because if they can do all that, then they're just on point on their game. And, that's like if you said, okay, if you take away Mike Evans and then you get pressure on Tom Brady and sack him a bunch and also take away Gronkowski in the red zone. It's like, that would have been great for the Chiefs to do. But, it's like it's one of those things where sometimes guys are just going to beat you because they find ways and things don't break your way. And that's kind of how that game was with the Titans. They were one long Lamar Jackson run where the defense just looked helpless out there. And that stupid interception where Batts and Raymond fell down away from, being a very competitive game or, because we did see this same team beat the Ravens in the regular season. Like, when everybody was healthy, they beat them, decent. I mean, like they beat them in overtime, but it was one of those, they had to drive the field to make it an overtime game. So I don't know. Like, I don't disagree with what you're saying, but you can really only fix so much. So I would love to spend 3 straight first-round picks on wide receivers and get all that talent, but there's always a give and take to it. So for this offense to be as good as it was last year, I think you can get away with a second or third round wide receiver that kind of plugs in and just does their job. But if you are okay with what you have on defense at corner and at edge, then you can roll the dice on a wide receiver in round 1 and maybe be better on offense in 2 years and keep up the offense, pretty consistently this year. And, you can make that trade-off. There's so many moving parts and it's all about the value. I don't know. It's tough.
Before we do Stop the Nonsense, let's address quickly, because I mentioned we would at the beginning, the national news of the week. Let's just hit both simultaneously. Maybe, Matthias, you can take one, and Will, you can take the other. Part one, the Panthers giving up a trio of draft picks in exchange for now former Jets quarterback Sam Darnold, after Teddy Bridgewater, not surprisingly, was not very good for them last year. Teddy Bridgewater is an okay quarterback. He's not going to win you games. I don't know that Sam Bradford is better than that. Sam Darnold is better than that, but we'll see what happens. And then in the with the 49ers, they are, according to Adam Schefter and Benjamin Albright and Matt Miller and most people that are smart, it's like 97% going to be Mac Jones.
I'm going to let Will take the Mac Jones one because that's just going to make me upset. So I'll talk about Darnold. I don't really understand what the Panthers are doing. I'm going to be honest with you. Like, they gave up a 2nd and 4th round pick. Okay, it was next year, but it doesn't matter. For a 6th round pick and Sam Darnold. Like, you have the 8th pick in the draft. You probably could have gotten, well, apparently not Mac Jones, but possibly Trey Lance or Justin Fields, or you could have traded up for one of them. Like, I would rather. I think there's this weird and probably wrong notion that we don't know what we have in Sam Darnold. That there is still untapped potential. There might be a little bit because he's been on pretty terrible offenses, but what has he shown? Ever. In college, he had, one good year? He had a couple of good games. I can't even remember who it was against. And then he comes to the Jets. He's a top 5 pick. He's supposed to be their savior. They still had good skill position players. Yeah, Adam Gase sucks, but he showed absolutely nothing. Just absolutely nothing. I mean, he has a 45-39 touchdown to interception ratio, and he's just never done anything. And now we're expecting him, just because he's 23 years old and they're giving him a change of scenery. He'll have Christian McCaffrey, Robbie Anderson, DJ Moore, that he'll just figure it all out. Like, I don't understand why you're giving up a 2nd and 4th round pick for what already seems like we kind of know what he probably is.
Yeah, this is not Ryan Tannehill. And I put this on Twitter the other night. The notion that, like, these situations are similar. It's like, well, Tannehill was under Adam Gase, too. Tannehill didn't stink under Adam Gase.
Tannehill was good.
He wasn't great. He was certainly passable, if not good, He got him to the playoffs at least once. Now Tannehill is an assassin. That's the word that I use to describe him. He's incredible. But Tannehill was not a schmuck with the Dolphins, and Sam Darnold has been that with the Jets. That's the difference in these two scenarios. Will, Mac Jones, 3rd overall. Why?
Really bad player evaluation. It's just like, but you can't blame it on like being under pressure and under the clock because they did it with a month to go. It's, I don't know. Like, I've always said that the quarterback position in the NFL is one of the hardest things to really scout and evaluate because it matters so much what system you go into. And they're going into a system that can basically create yards at will on the ground. Like they're great at scheming that up. They've got a really good offensive line. They've got Kittle. They've got Deebo Samuel and Brandon Ayuk, who Brandon Ayuk was much better than I thought he would be. And I don't even think he was that great, but I just didn't. I thought he and Rager would be similar in that they would just be guys who didn't really ever look good. And at least Ayuk looked good sometimes. So you've got tools there. You know, the defense is talented, but they're switching coaches. I don't know. Like it screams desperation to me in a situation where I didn't think they should necessarily be that desperate. Mac Jones as a player is fine. He's super, like, we have very little tape on him, and the tape we have of him is him playing with a stacked roster, and it's not like he really makes a ton of really high difficult throw. Like I don't know why anybody would be in love with him. I don't know why anybody would take him at 3, much less trade up for the honor to take him at 3. I guess is the best way. Like, it's crazy to me.
My two things with this are I think they could have gotten him at 12. I don't know if there was a whole lot of competition ahead of them to get him. And then number 2, I don't know that he's a massive upgrade over Jimmy Garoppolo.
Yeah, I don't either, but is Garoppolo ever going to play a full season?
Yeah.
Are they just done worrying about his injuries? Like, are they ready to get his contract off the book any way they can? Like, those are the questions. And then, I don't get it, because what this tells you is that they think that there's a massive drop off from 3 to 4 in terms of the 3rd and 4th best quarterback, because they were so afraid that the Dolphins were going to trade with somebody else that they weren't going to get their guy, and that they were so they were so worried that, you know, somebody else was going to like Mac Jones the way they did, that they're willing to pay all this. But I mean, Atlanta would have traded down. Like, surely they got into contact with them, but it should never have gotten to 3 first rounds, or, you know, that's just too expensive. And I don't understand. Like, basically we've heard that they were bidding against themselves, and they're one of the only, if not the only team that has Mac Jones rated that high. And that, you know, even people who know, quote unquote, that Mac Jones is going to be the pick are hoping that it didn't. And they're saying, you know, they played it pretty close to the vest, so it may not be as clear as everybody thinks, but it would be surprising if it's not Mac Jones. And it's like, even the people who've heard it are so convinced that it's a smokescreen based off how, not bad, but just boring Mac Jones is, that they've tried to talk themselves out of it. And it's just a tough look. Like, I don't know who's going to benefit from this, because Mac Jones is going to get crucified if he's not instantly successful, and if that team doesn't go back to the playoffs. It's tough.
Well, I'll say this as we wrap up and head into Stop the Nonsense. One thing Matt Miller was saying was that there's no reason for them to smoke screen at this point, because the teams ahead of them are taking quarterbacks, so, like, who cares? Like, you know, them saying we like Mac Jones, if they actually like Zach Wilson, doesn't make a difference to anything.
Yeah, the only reason you do this is to, like, smoke out who you can trust and who you can't. Like, who's leaking out information and who's not. Because there's no strategic advantage, because, like you said, like, it's not like they're picking again at 5 and they don't want somebody to take their pick at, you know.
Yeah.
There's no reason to snow anybody. Like, the Darnold trades happened. We all know that it's Lawrence, Wilson, whatever. If you're going to pump somebody up, now's the time to do it. Like, now's the time to say, hey, Rappaport, we really think that Trey Lance is going to be a stud. He looks great. Like, look at him on like, the fact that everybody's reluctantly saying Mac Jones is just a terrible, it's a terrible sign both of the confidence of the organization in terms of hyping a guy up and in terms of the fact that nobody else thought that he should be a top 5 pick. I mean, we were I think Matt Miller had the Colts trading up into the top 10 or something to draft Mac Jones before the Carson Wentz trade, and they gave up like a second round pick this year, and that's it. And people lost their minds. Like, people were like, if they trade up for Mac Jones, Ballard should be fired, and all. Like, people were, and now we're basically like, I guess he's the quarterback. I guess Mac Jones is their guy. Like, and they traded away the same ransom that everybody's traded to get up to number 1 in the past. It blows my mind that this is just everybody waking up and laughing at the 49ers every day. But then again, maybe that's why they're not pumping it up, because they don't want to get laughed at, but they know that that's the only guy that they think can run their offense.
This feels like a decision that will get people fired. It just does, because you don't give away that much. If he's going to be Jimmy Garoppolo Jr. or Kirk Cousins, like, you can't win anything with Kirk Cousins. Imagine if that's his ceiling.
What about this?
We talked about this last week, by the way, that the Shanahan quote is like that his favorite quarterback.
Yeah,
that he's
we did talk about that last week.
So there it is. So it's like that should have told us, and now the fact that it's being confirmed now shouldn't be surprising, because that's his template of what the perfect quarterback is Kirk Cousins.
If they draft Mac Jones, who's the starter week 1? Because I think it might still be Jimmy.
It better be Mac Jones.
Yeah,
I agree.
You just gave away 3 first-round picks for him.
Yeah, you can't do that. Like, at that point, you just draft somebody and sit them, and then hope they have value. Like the Patriots did with Jimmy Garoppolo. It's like, if you like a guy and you just need a backup quarterback, you wait and do that. But I mean, that Garoppolo has a no trade clause. Like, there's so many things wrong with this. Like, they're going to get terrible value for him anyway. Like, he's going to have to pre-approve whatever team he goes to, and he's under no there's no reason he should want to move on. Like, there's a good chance he goes into camp and sees how terrible Mac Jones is and does what Aaron Rodgers did, which is like, okay, just gave me a raise, but I see the option that y'all invested in heavily right behind me, and he sucks. So I'm going to stay here and remind you how bad he is and make sure the team knows that I'm better than him. And then in a year, you're either going to have to pay me more money, or you're going to have to lose the locker room and explain to them why you traded me away. Like, I mean, it better be Mac Jones, because otherwise, I mean, maybe not Shanahan, because Shanahan has proven his value so many times. But, I mean, general manager, whoever, like, I mean, you got to clean house somewhere.
Mm-hmm. Let's do Stop the Nonsense, guys. Who wants to get started?
I'll do mine, because I'm furious about it still. So,
is this Bally Sports?
Yeah. The Predators are playing a game right now, and they're playing the Detroit Red Wings. This is, in the future, so I'm sure the Predators won 8-0 or 8-1 or whatever. And y'all already know this, but I've watched every Predators game this season. If not every one, then all but a couple. And I like the Predators. I enjoy them. I go to the games when I can. And so they've always been on Fox Sports South. Well, the beginning of the year, they said, we're going to switch to Bally Sports at the end of March. After March, run in April, Bally Sports, blah, blah, blah. They've said several times, you don't have to change anything. Everything stays the same for you. Great. I normally watch on television, but because we're doing the podcast, I was trying to find the background for whenever we get done. And so I searched around for the podcast and couldn't find it. I looked on my phone. I looked on, Fox Sports South. Nothing. I said, okay, that's weird. So then I looked on YouTube TV. It's not there either. Okay. So then I look on the app the App Store to find if there's a Bally Sports, app streaming service or whatever. Nothing there. Super weird. Then I search on Twitter for it, and all I find is one account that's private, which can't be it, and another account that's tweeting about baseball, which is insane to me, and it isn't tweeting about, the Predators game or whatever. So I'm out of luck, and they've been basically telling me for 2 months not to worry about it, that everything's going to stay the same, whatever. So I'm furious because now I've got to figure out, am I going to have to find a site that streams this for the rest of my life? Are they going to finally develop an app because they had months to do it? Like, what? I'm trying to keep it as PG as I can because I'm losing my mind because that seems like such a stupid thing to do. But yeah, that's my stop the nonsense is if you're going to take over a channel, spend the 2 hours it takes to make an app that streams or to make a website that streams it online. Like I'm just furious.
Matthias?
I'll go next. I'm going to talk about football, but not American football, European football. So in Spain, in the Spanish league, La Liga, there was a bit of an incident this past weekend. It was a game between Cadiz and Valencia, and there's a French center back on Valencia. He's black, and one of the Cadiz players allegedly racially abused him, called him, a racist, a racial slur.
That one word we're not supposed to say.
Well, it was in Spanish, but yeah, essentially not the.
For sure, the words we shouldn't say.
Anyway, the center back from Valencia, the black guy, ended up leaving the game. He got substituted off. His team came back to finish the game. Then they substituted off the guy that racially abused him at halftime. It was an absolute disaster. And then 2 days after, this guy, the one who racially abused the black guy, comes out in a press conference and makes some of the most outlandish statements I've ever seen. He said he was getting publicly lynched by the media, that it was a circus, that they're tarnishing his name, and that the other guy just completely invented whatever's happening. And then that pissed me off because there's actual video of him saying it, you can hear it. But the thing that pissed me off the most was he claimed that racism doesn't exist in Spanish soccer. And I cannot explain how many times there have been racist incidents in Spanish soccer. It's every single year there's something huge that happens. I mean, a couple of years ago, they threw a banana at a Brazilian player because, they have darker skin. They threw a banana onto the field at him, and he ended up eating the banana. It was hilarious. But it was just awful. And I've been to Spanish soccer games. They are incredibly racist. The fans are awful. They chant some of the most racist, sexist, homophobic things I've ever seen. And just for this guy to say this and then say he's getting publicly lynched, it's just the worst phrasing and just the worst use of his time, use of our time, and it's just so narrow-minded. And I hope he's probably going to get suspended the rest of the season. I hope he does.
My Stop the Nonsense is also sports-related. It's about Shohei Ohtani, the Los Angeles Anaheim Angels. I'm still confused about that after having watched baseball for all these years. The Angels, designated hitter / starting pitcher, who played great about a week ago. He was the starting pitcher, and he also batted for himself. The Angels play in the AL, so typically we get a DH, but manager Joe Madden said, nope, we're going to let Ohtani bat for himself, and why not? Because he's really good. You would have thought that, based on his performance in that game, that a combination of Mike Trout and Clayton Kershaw had taken the field that night. I mean, people were ready to declare him the greatest player of all time. And the reason that bugged me is twofold. First of all, Ohtani is not new. he's been in Major League Baseball for, I believe, 3 years now. We know he's a two-way player. We know that he can throw the ball really hard. He's a good pitcher. We know he's a good hitter. He can crank it. We know that, all right? This is not news. But number two, he's never healthy. He's never played a full season at both positions. And yet people are always freaking out about him. And I remember I said this as soon as he defected or came over, or whatever you call it, and the Angels got him. People were already ready to declare him an all-star just immediately. And I said, we got to see if it works. Well, it turns out he's really good, but he's never healthy. So I'm willing to say that if Shohei Ohtani can play 150 games in a season, then yeah, he's one of the top 10 most valuable players in Major League Baseball. But until he can stay healthy, I do not understand why we have to declare him a king of some kind because he hit a home run into the first deck. And that's the thing too. Like, everyone was acting like moonshot, unbelievable home run. It went in the first deck. He pulled it. It was a home run. Big deal.
Excuse my baseball ignorance, but didn't he have to leave the game like a couple days ago because of a play?
Probably. I can't remember.
It was the day he was pitching, and there was a play at the plate, and he got slid into, and he came out of the game. I'm pretty sure.
Look,
and I found Will is gonna.
Will has thoughts.
Y'all are too much of cowards to say it. I'll do it. We should boycott baseball. Yeah. And you know what? I will be the one out of the three of us that takes that first leap because I'm brave and some would call me a hero. So I'm officially boycotting baseball.
I just don't understand. I mean, that's like writers that I have a lot of respect for were like, man, oh man, I've never seen anything like this. He pulled a home run into the first deck. You've never seen anything like that? What are you talking about? It happens every day.
To be fair, I've never seen anything like that.
Yeah.
But that's sort of by choice.
Yeah.
I'm trying to angle myself away from that.
All right, that's going to do for us. Next week, we are super excited because one of our very favorite guests that we have on this show, Justin Mello from the Draft Network, will be joining us for the entire hour, as he does every year leading up to the draft. So we're really excited about that. We hope you are too. We hope you will join us for that. Until then, for Will and Matthias, I'm Luke, reminding you and everyone else in the sports world to stop the nonsense.